live.
Yeah, it's about to get done right now. So in a few seconds, it's just setting up on Facebook.
Okay, perfect. So it seems that we are live with the quarantine sessions. Welcome everyone once again to the quarantine sessions. Today we're streaming a bit differently due to some difficulties which we had, but I'm super excited for today's session. We're going to talk about a crucial topic, and we have a stellar guest. His name is Ahmad Samir. He's joining us from Cairo Angels. This is the first of the Ramadan edition of the quarantine session. So thank you so much, Ahmed, for joining.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I'm super excited to get this through, and hopefully we can be of benefit to everyone watching.
Yeah, definitely. So if you have questions or if you want to send us some comments, tell us where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you and would love to answer all the questions related to pitching. Basically, today's session is focused on how to build a perfect pitch, which is the question a lot of entrepreneurs' minds when pitching to investors, when attending startup competitions, right? So I wanted to start, Ahmed, by asking, what are the key elements that every pitch or successful pitch should have?
I mean, it's for a successful pitch, what you really want is for all your points to basically be delivered. What you want is, first of all, to stick, right? So if there's a story, if there's a certain number of points you want to get through, you just have to make sure that basically if anyone's watching, if they have nothing to do with the industry, they don't know much about your startup, they'll still remember it, they'll still understand. That's the basic part. That's the ground stone, where the platform that you build your pitch on, which is simplicity. Right. After you do that, after you have that simplicity, then what you want to make sure of is that it's engaging, right? So I understand it and I'm engaged throughout. And the easiest way I like to tell the startups that I work with is I tell them to create the story that made you want to start the startup. So just turn that passion into a linear story, and throughout it, give me the information that I need. Right. So that when I start to remember your startup, I'm remembering your story as an entrepreneur, rather than one of the hundreds of startups I see on an annual basis.
Right. Storytelling, right? Storytelling is key. Engaging, right? Grabbing the attention. It's basically the same principle that we use with storytelling, grabbing the attention of the audience, of the listener, right? And if we bring it down to, or if we break it down to, the actual parts of the pitch, do you start with the problem? Do you start with the solution? What do you advise?
So generally, there's that certain structure that everyone likes to follow. It's kind of like a skeleton that it's built on. So you start with, first of all, start with a one-liner to give me an idea of why I should listen. That usually gets everyone engaged. And then what you want to start with is the problem. And what I found is the perfect way is to split your problem into 3 sections. So you're talking about very specific elements that are basically going to lead up to your MVP. So if you have a problem of paperwork, so that everyone's still on paper and you want to digitize them, this means that your digital ability is going to be there on the MVP, and you reflect that in the problem, if that kind of makes sense. Which is why when you get into the problem, when it's specific and when it's understandable, the solution will look much more powerful. So that's why we usually couple them together, problem, solution. And then now that I know that this has a huge potential, I want to see what you've done. And this is probably the biggest challenge, is to show me the product and not retell me the solution. So you're showing me the customer journey, you're showing me what you're doing, what you've been up to. And then you start by going into the basic elements, which is starting to talk about, for example, your market size. When it comes to your market size, it's usually better to be in dollars and to show a growth rate. So these are like the basics, first sections of the pitch. And as you add on more elements, it's always better to give more specifics, but again, adhere to the original story. I'd love to share my screen, Valentina, if you don't mind.
Yes,
maybe I can go through that process very quickly.
Would love that.
All right, perfect. So what we have here is a presentation. So I work for the Cairo Angels. I'm the associate, and what we've done is basically an accumulation of the things that we've seen and what we've learned from the successful and the best startups that we've seen so far. And this is, like I said, more of a learning experience than it is a one-to-one guide of how to create the perfect pitch. It's something that you're going to have to personalize. And the skeleton I talked about, which I'm going to outline, is a skeleton. A lot of the startups that I see, they're more comfortable moving these around. And it's up to you to decide what would be the best way for your story, for your startup.
Right.
So the attention grabber, memorable, relevant. It's always better to have something that no one expects. For example, one of the startups would go for, if you have a pet, please raise your hand. So everyone's a bit confused. Should they actually raise their hand, or is this part of is this a rhetoric question?
Right.
Go into the problem. Simple. IKEA's problem was that they couldn't transport furniture. That was the problem. And once that's said, no one's going to forget it, right? No one's going to forget something as simple as that.
Yeah.
And the solution, again, regardless of whatever you put in your solution, has to be directly relatable to the problem. If I see a solution that doesn't make sense to me, I stop listening. Because then automatically in my head, in my psychology, I'm starting to think, I guess I don't understand what's being said, or I don't know enough about it. So I switch off.
Right.
And demo has to be clear customer journey. If you don't have a clear customer journey to me, then you probably won't have it to your customer, because I have direct communication with you.
Right. Let me stop you for a minute there. So the customer journey, how do you express that, and how do you actually strategize that?
That's a great question. So basically, when you structure your customer journey, what you want to show me is how easy it is to use. So for example, if we take a massive startup like Uber as an example, their customer journey is quite simple, right? You log in, and then you show me that login page, you show me that location page, you show me that there is a search bar which leads to me deciding where I want to go, and then you show me that there is a confirm button.
Right.
So that when I see it, I can visualize what a customer will see.
Right.
And it goes both ways. If there is a marketplace, for example, if you offer a marketplace for selling, we had a startup that has a marketplace for selling livestock. And what was great was that they had a very clear customer journey for any partner.
Right.
And it was vital, because every time they pitched, people would wait for that demo, because in their head, people that would be using that app need something very simple.
Right.
And so that's how you kind of visualize and structure it.
Right. So next slide.
Yeah. So the next one is the market size. One of my favorite times where someone was explaining this was that they said, all I care about is money and how much money you're going to make. And so what they said is, what exists now is something you're going to fight for. What the growth rate is your potential is a higher potential to capture. So for example, the construction industry in Egypt is around 350 billion annually. And then when you look at the growth rate is 10%. So as a startup in the construction industry, you're automatically going to think that's 10% up for the grabs, right? And 10% of 350 billion is a dream. So that's why that CAGR, that growth rate, as well as that monetary value, is perfect. For a lot of the startups that are creating something new, that's when they start looking at number of users. Again, even if you have something new, you can multiply your number of users as an assumption for the revenue you're going to make, and that can be your market size. It's just very important to have a figure. Finally, if you have none of those, you can look at a competitor, their valuation, and you can proxy that as your potential.
Right. So we have these key strategies, right? One is more of a top-down one. The other one is more of a bottom-up, sort of calculating back, right, the expected growth. And then this one is very interesting, right? The valuation of your global competitor. I have a question here. So what about, they always say, never say you have no competitors, because there's always someone who's solving your problem, right? So startups that are really innovating, particularly now, for example, in times of COVID, when new problems are coming up all the time, where can they look for, who's solving that problem? What kind of exercises can they do? I'm sorry if this is a little bit off topic, but I'm just
no problem at all. Actually, probably one of the most difficult things is doing your competitor landscape. The key thing, the easiest thing to do is just think about what people are doing now. So for example, whatever problem people are facing, they have some sort of solution, whether it's inefficient, whether it's expensive, they're doing something. It's a habit and something they have to do to be able to get their day to go on. So that's one thing. So just think about what's the direct solution, the inefficient solution that they're using right now. That's your first competitor. The second step is to start looking at how people globally are solving that problem. You can do that in a number of ways. The easiest way I found is just to type in your problem into Google, and then you'll see some of these solutions starting to come up. Just take that and use that as a framework for your competition. You can also do the same thing. For example, some of the startups that we've seen, they go on to groups for people like, for example, if there's a issue with fan engagement, they go onto a group and see what people or entities are advertising there. It's a little bit of hard work because you have to keep at it and change the wording and like look in a number of ways to get that done. But it's definitely going to be worth it, and it's a lot better than standing up and saying I don't have competitors.
Right.
I'm not sure if it's an actionable guide, but that's usually what we do with the startups.
Definitely. And it's funny how sometimes it's the solution, right? The answer is so simple, right? Just typing on a Google search bar. I guess that resourcefulness comes really, really handy.
Yeah, basically, we've seen people like trying to look at competitors by looking at Google Maps and just typing in options. We've seen so many different things to try to find your competition. It's fine if you miss one, but if you have almost all of them or most of them, then you're good to go.
Right. So once you have the market size, let's go back to the pitch, right? You're showing the market size. What comes next?
Right. So basically, right after the market size, I want to know how you're going to make money. Right. So this is a massive market. Very intrigued. How do you make money? And then right here, there's two types of startups, right? There's a startup that's pre-revenue, that's never going to make money, or that's going to make money in 3-4 years. And then the startup that's revenue-based. If you're a startup that's revenue-based, just look at some of these options. It's good enough. There isn't really anything to explain: commission, markup, advertisement, subscriptions. These are all very basic terms, and they all describe based on your revenue model. On the other side, there's also the aspect of, if you're a marketplace, you want to tell me where you're going to get your supply, where you're going to get your customers, just a brief description so that I can kind of see how this is going to work. Right. In the case of a pre-revenue model that's going to, like, for example, Facebook, it's very important to show me, again, the potential. So we had one startup that was pre-revenue, and in their business model, what they basically said was, the data that I gather from one user is worth to me $10. Right. And that will accumulate as we get more users. And as we get more users, that $10 will really start to be clear. Right. So a business model, 100%, I want to see how you're going to make money. And it's a very good proxy and a very big discussion point when it comes to deciding whether or not you're going to partner with a startup. Great. Right. So this is a big one. Do you recommend having both business model and revenue model? How are they basically integrated into the pitch deck? So basically right here, I kind of want to see both. In terms of business model, we don't really want to go into deep details unless this is a longer pitch. So if this is a 15-minute pitch, then maybe you can go into the details of your business model. But for a 5-minute pitch, I'm more focused on a revenue model. And if you have details that are very specific that can help me, say, for example, I'm going to be getting my supply from this entity, which is going to help me mark up after doing my production process and get to this figure. My average markup is 15%. Right. That's good enough for me in terms of a business model. And it also gives me something to ask about. And that's the goal of a pitch, to generate questions. Right. We have someone in the audience, Ahmad Khairi, who's asking, what is SaaS, software as a service, right? Yeah. Okay. So software as a service is basically full SaaS, or software as a service is reflected in a product that you can install without any human interference, and that can be installed right into your software or your production process. So for example, we have a SaaS model or a SaaS startup that we used to work with. It's an ERP system, enterprise software platform. I think that's the right abbreviation. And then, so basically their ERP system, what they used to do with it is attendance logs and performance logs. So this is a full SaaS model because they provide that as a monthly subscription or a quarterly subscription to businesses to be able to use directly. Right. Can we give examples of perhaps some global startup, some global company that offers SaaS? So for example, Oracle, SAP, these are two big examples of SaaS solutions. For example, I think Google's the 360 Google, that's another example of SaaS. So basically, it's software that you run a subscription with.
Right. Perfect. Okay, I hope that was clear, Ahmed. If there's more questions, just write them in the comments and we're going to be checking them out and answering them. Let's move on to the next slide then, when you're pitching your startup.
Right. This is more of a reminder of what you need to be insinuating and what you need to be doing throughout your pitch. One of my favorite actually pitches to work on was a pitch where their main value or their main secret sauce, as we like to call it, was that they were going to aim for that unicorn status. And so regardless of everything, every sentence that was said in that pitch was framed as a step towards becoming a unicorn.
Right.
Anyone watching it, even if they have no idea what this industry is, was completely convinced of its potential.
Right.
So right here, this is really just a reminder that in the beginning, the middle, and the end of the pitch, you need to have that clear. And in terms of some ideas where you can find your secret sauce, there's the operational model. So for example, a lot of startups, their innovation is a lean process. That lean process allows them to do things faster. For example, the most famous, I think in my opinion, is McDonald's. Yeah. The key thing in McDonald's was how fast they could produce those burgers. Right. And if you watch the founder, maybe you can explain it a bit better. And then team experience, if you have 10, 15 years of experience, showcase that. The average age of a successful entrepreneur is 47 years old. The more experience you guys have, the more you want to showcase it. Right. First mover advantage, definitely, but it depends really. So if you're saying I'm a localized product, so I'm the first mover in the region, that's a bit tricky, because then you invite the question of what if the global players come here? What's going to be your advantage? Right. So here, first mover advantage is very important if you are really a first mover globally, or if you have a feature that allows you to be a first mover into the region. I hope that kind of makes sense. And then finally, which is kind of the clear point, is the patent. So having a patent, a technology no one can use, right? You just kind of say that throughout the pitch at every single opportunity to really lock that in people's minds.
Right. I love how it's very integrated with the storytelling aspect and kind of a marketing aspect, right? Like you need to work on your pitch with the whole team. Get the marketing team on board as well to get all these elements and make it really attractive. And it's not just about the numbers, right?
Definitely. I mean, right with the pitch deck, I like to use the quote that I heard from one of the innovation managers at PayPal. So this was he was working back there in the 80s and the 90s at Silicon Valley. And he used to say that there isn't an innovation department. There's an innovation implementation department and testing department. The culture of the company needs to be an innovative culture to be able to innovate. So everyone needs to take part. And in that sense, it's always good when you're pitching to listen to all of your team, because then once you listen to them, you hear value propositions that you haven't thought about. And then you put that into the pitch in every element you can.
Right. Now, speaking about patents and about, registering basically that idea or that, Ahmed is asking, how can he protect his startup idea? And this is a question a lot of entrepreneurs ask themselves, right? Like, how can I protect it? Because, they're afraid that someone may steal their idea.
Right. I mean, I understand why that's a valid concern. In my opinion, what I've learned is that this is a concern in terms of if you're worried about someone else stealing a patent or stealing some proprietary knowledge, which basically means knowledge that you have that no one else does. In terms of an idea, one of the things that you need to consider is that research actually shows that probably none of us have had an original thought in our entire lives. And while that's quite depressing to think about, it also means that probably other people have your idea. Actually, one of our startups, it was so engaging that anytime they had a post on Facebook, people would say, hey, these guys stole our idea. And it was such an infuriating thing at first for them because everyone thought it was their idea. Right. But then they realized what we've been trying to say, which is it's implementation. It's nothing else. It's not an originality. It's not first mover advantage. It's not because you started. It's because you implemented and executed correctly.
Yeah, right. Just before we move on to the next slide, Bassam is also asking, what is the most important element in the pitch deck?
It's you, right? It's the person pitching. I can send an amazing pitch deck, and then once I hear the person talking, I'm not going to go forward. So it's the entrepreneur, 100%.
That's an
Um,
incredible insight that you're giving us right now, because
I,
it's not yeah, it's incredible because the power, right, of the entrepreneur, basically the power of the
yeah,
team, the power of that who executes, right?
I mean, honestly, we've seen horrible pitch decks, horrible. But
Mhm,
then the entrepreneur is so good, you
mhm.
realize you just need to polish this pitch, and they're gonna go places. And we've seen the other way around. We've seen amazing pitch decks with huge potential, but then while the person is pitching, we can realize that maybe this isn't the right person for this idea and this execution model. And that's everything you need to keep in mind, really. If we've seen startups that have gotten investment on a dinner table, right? So they didn't have a pitch deck, they didn't have anything. It was just them and an investor on a dinner table, and they closed it. They closed it as in they met right after it for a check.
Wow,
So it really depends on you, your energy, your passion, your enthusiasm. Getting that across, that's all that matters.
incredible. You have to sell yourself, right, as well.
Yeah. I mean, you're the company at this point. If you're an early stage startup, it's you.
Right, right. Mohammed Ademi is asking if they can get your presentation later on. I mean, the video is going to be available on our
Mhm.
YouTube channel, on our Facebook page. Perhaps, I don't know if Ahmed is.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
I don't mind at all. I don't mind sending it at all.
yeah,
I think I can send it to you, and maybe you can find a way to kind of
definitely,
send.
yes,
Yeah, yeah,
definitely.
no
We
problem
can
at
do
all.
that. You can contact us, guys, and we can share it around. But let's move on. So we were talking about the secret sauce, right? Showcasing that element that is going to win
Yeah,
or lose the case. What is the next step?
sure. All right. So the next step is, like I said, competitive landscape. Very difficult, very important. It's really important to get across your features.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
like to do it in a grid. So like you can see, it's a table. And on the top horizontal axis, you can put in the logos of the startup or the competitors that you have, direct, indirect, and then also include the general solutions that people might use if cases that it's relevant.
Hmm.
And then on the left vertical axis, you
Hmm.
put in your features, your competitive advantage. And then you single out which one of your competitors also does some of these features. And the goal here is to show that you are the startup that has all of these kind of variables or features in their product, and that's what sets you apart.
Right.
And it's important to also kind of explain why these features are important, right? So if you have additional features that aren't important, then basically tough luck. But then if you show me that these two features will increase adoption, these two features are why you believe you're going to have higher traction than anyone else in the market, I'm sold. So it's
Right.
important to include that right here and make sure that it's delivered correctly. So it's fine to spend a bit of time here as long as you're spending it on the right aspects or on the right features. Don't spend any time on something that everyone has. It's pointless.
Right. What happens to those startups that have a ton of competitors? Let's say delivery, right? Those fields that are they're pretty
It's
filled
pretty
with
tough.
competitors now. Do you include all of them? Do you select the closest ones? What do you advise?
So here I would put in the ones that are different, right? So maybe if they're a delivery company, I know a few. So for example, there's menus and then there's Voo. So menus has all of the products, all of the menus, and then Voo is a bit more personalized. You
Mhm,
also have Kareem's Wasalni app where you can deliver directly.
mhm,
So there's three kind of more than one tranche or more than one vertical within that delivery kind of space. And then you can include those, or if you're focused on that one vertical, you can include those in that same vertical. So if example, you're in F&B delivery, so then you'd include only the people that have F&B delivery and then kind of disregard the rest.
right, right, right. Um, So we have a few more questions before we move on to the next slide. Ahmed is asking if he wants to make a deal with any large company, what is the clear process to do that? And Heba is asking, is it better to have many mentors or is it going to be confusing? So two very, very different questions, but we can jump on this before moving on to the final
Sure.
slides.
Sure, no problem. So basically, when it comes to B2B, probably I would very highly advise that you talk to someone who has a lot more experience in B2B. But generally, the challenge that we've seen is that if this is a regulated market, so if it's a multinational company that you're trying to approach, LinkedIn, and then send that to the people that would be relevant. Second thing is use your network. You probably know people, if you're within that industry, if you've worked within that industry, you know people who can get you to the right place. Use that aggressively. And then finally, which might be successful, is either a cold call or a visit to see if it's possible to set a meeting. I would definitely go for network, and then you go for LinkedIn. When it comes to LinkedIn, again, very important to kind of talk to someone with that sort of experience, but keep it short, add an invitation, do that with a bunch of people, and then wait to see if someone bites.
Right.
And in terms of mentors, I mean, it really depends on what you think is a lot. So 10 mentors is a lot for one person. 2 to 3, maybe 4, maybe that could work. It's important though to know that a mentor is supposed to give you advice, to propose alternative ways of thinking. So if 4 people can give you alternative ways of thinking, that's great. If 4 are in different departments, great. If 4 people are fighting on the same thing, that's probably not going to do anything other than waste your time. At best, if you want to have different opinions on the same thing, have 2 mentors, and at that time, make them sit together. So don't take feedback from one person and take feedback from a second person. Try to create a conversation with all parties included, and try to come up from that with actionable items or advice that you want to take back and start thinking about. But never kind of let the mentor direct you to what you should or shouldn't be doing.
Right. That's very important. That's very important as well. Yeah.
Definitely.
Let's move on to the next slides on the pitch deck.
Yeah. So this is probably just one of the simplest things to do. Your team, what you've done, who you are, and then just a personalized photo kind of to give people a feel of everyone else on your team. I've seen people who have done put their mentors on their team. If they're big names and you want to include them, that's definitely something you can do. What's important is, for example, if I was going to be on a team slide, I would put in Ahmad Samir, associate at the Cairo Angels. And then I'd also put, for example, my different experiences. So I'd include different logos to show what I've been doing before, and give kind of a hint on why I fit in this role.
Right. This is another important slide, right? That sells, that can really cut the deal. The team sometimes is crucial.
Definitely. I mean, I've seen, honestly, we've seen team slides that blew us away, right? So we've had that one startup that had a patent actually in deep learning artificial intelligence. And then throughout this pitch, you can't really believe that this is an actual product that they've produced. And then once you see that team, you see those PhDs, you see those work experiences, all these amazing tenures, and you're thinking, yeah, right, that makes sense. That now makes sense that these people are able to create a product that no one else in the world is creating.
Right.
If they didn't have that team slide, probably no one would have believed the entrepreneur, and probably they would have thought that maybe he has something that isn't entirely accurate, although he thinks so. Right. So it's definitely pivotal to kind of sell that team. Actually, yeah. I think over 60% of investors say that they invest in team first. So even though it's a simple slide to make, it's definitely, the script of that slide is definitely very important.
Yeah, definitely. Bassem is also asking, what should I avoid in my pitch deck?
I think avoid being overly confident. So avoid being kind of, no one's going to be able to do what I've done, because chances are your investor is highly experienced and will be able to see certain holes in your plan. If it's an angel investor, they're going to see that and they're going to plug it in, right? They're going to want to help. If it's a VC, they probably have a less tolerance, but they also want to help. But if they see someone that seems that they aren't coachable, that they won't listen, that's a huge major turnoff when it comes to an entrepreneur. Yeah. You also don't want to spend too much time on any slide. So we had a kind of rule of thumb is try to keep each slide at most 1 minute, at least 30 seconds. So that you're not really talking about the same thing for a long time and everyone just kind of understands it from the first try. Yeah. And then maybe finally something you want to avoid is that if you're pitching to one person directly and it's kind of a Q&A format, don't keep talking for a long time, because usually the biggest indicator for an investor to be interested is the questions they ask, not how long they listen. It's very difficult for someone to be like, stop talking. but they will ask questions if they're interested. So that's something to kind of remember. So basically, don't over-explain and don't show off as someone who is extremely confident and unique in every way.
Right, right. Let's move on to the final slides. What comes after?
So sure, this is one of the, I think the final slides, which is traction. This particular slide, I think is a great slide to kind of move around with depending on your story. And basically you want to say, right, so this is all of this amazing potential, amazing people. You need to believe in me. And then the final nail in the coffin is, right, so I've said all these things and I've done this. So this is that market adoption, right? This is this product market fit that we've been able to do. And once you sell that, if you have those numbers, buy it. There's no question about it. Because it really does indicate, especially for markets that aren't well known, how much potential there is. There have been so many startups that come to us. For example, we had a pricing model for basically handyman or blue collar workers. And the blue collar workers were the ones using the app. And every single time the entrepreneur pitched, the pitch would be over. And the first question is, why would they use you? And so we focused actually most of the pitch around that people have used him,
right,
and have been using his app for 2 months, continuously, almost daily. And once that kind of clicked in, the difference in the attitude towards the startup was monumental.
right.
And then one of the things that you can use, definitely numbers that matter to you, but these are kind of just general items that we've seen, which is number of users that are currently on. If you're a marketplace, then number of service providers you have, revenue growth. This is preferably month-on-month revenue growth. And you want to aim for that 10% at least to kind of get that kind of interest. If you have any partners, if you have any partnerships, B2B deals that are going to help you get to your customers, definitely mention that. And then finally, the number of transactions, right? So if you have 100,000 users and have 50,000 transactions, that's not the best. If you have 100,000 users using you daily, so that's 1 million transactions, that's definitely going to buy in, right? That's definitely going to be very interesting.
Right. I have a question here. So what happens to very early stage startups that haven't managed to have, so much traction, or that may wonder, are these numbers really impressive? What do you do in those cases?
So right here, it's very important to kind of understand that we're not expecting you to have a $10 million revenue model, or it's not really about the quantity, it's about the timing. So if in the past 4 weeks of launch, you've been able to get a good number, that's a seller. If you've tested your app prior to going live, so for example, we've had a startup that went and sold an MVP and kind of a letter of intent. So they gave away their product, and then they had the other person sign saying, we're very interested in using it. And if it develops all the features that are in the timeline or in the product roadmap, we're going to buy. And so that was kind of an indication for everyone that even though they haven't sold a lot, there is that potential because people are willing to pay.
Right.
So there's two ways to go about it. Either your testing model and seeing that product market fit, or using letter of intents, which are non-legally binding, but to indicate that there's a customer buy.
Right. Perfect. We have a question from Hiba in the team slide, the previous slide. Should I mention myself as a founder and CEO or business lead? And should I represent myself as a manager or as a manager of the whole team?
So another part, I think, thank you, Hiba, for that question, because it strikes a really important part. What you say in your pitch is what the reality is. So if you are the CEO, then you're the CEO, right? So there's no one's going to be like, hey, you're too small of a startup to be a CEO. I'm the chief executive officer. I run the startup. Nothing to say, nothing to kind of argue about. If you're the business lead, which basically would mean that you're all on the same level, or you're all you've split your company hierarchy into business and tech. Again, that's up to you. I would not recommend that kind of split just in organizational hierarchy. But if that's what you've done, that's what you say, right? We've had startups that have pitched a CEO and 2 managing directors, because that's how their hierarchy is. So again, if you believe that you're the CEO, which means you're in charge of a lot of different aspects, then you're the CEO. There isn't supposed to be too much contention in terms of what I am is what I show.
Right, right. Perfect. Perfect. So we said team, we show traction, and then we're reaching the end.
Yes. So I'm sorry, I've taken a bit of time, but maybe I think this is missing from this one, which is the product more roadmap. So basically the features you want to have on. I love this slide because usually that's when startups start to dream and you can see that passion in their eyes because they're talking about where they want it to go. Yeah. Just include that, try to include that quarterly or biannually, what features and what milestones you have in mind. You can use that product roadmap as features and as revenue.
Right. Perfect.
And then the final thing is the capital ask. Which is going to be how much money you want as an investment. So let's say, for example, you want $100,000 as investment, and then you kind of explain what you're going to use that $100,000 for. So operations team and marketing, product development, there's a whole bunch of categories. And then you explain that through, for example, I've seen most of the startups, I've seen that done on a pie chart and just kind of show that there. And runway, which basically means how much this ask will last you. So I'm going to do $100,000. I'm going to spread it out across 18 months. And then after 18 months, well, I'll raise another round of investment. And usually runway is between 18 to 24 months.
Right, right. Do you advise, certain strategies in order to calculate the ask? Because that's another question sometimes that entrepreneurs ask. How do they estimate that?
So I think, again, probably would be best to let someone from an investment background or a financial background, but it's simply, it's how much you're making, revenue, versus how much cost you're going to incur. So if I'm going to incur $500,000 to be able to build an app, build an atmosphere, build a culture, build an office, for me to be able to begin major operations and scaling, and when I invest these $500,000, I know I'm going to make back only $300,000 now, not in the future. Then I'm going to ask for $200,000, right? To make up just the difference between the revenue and the cost. Right. That's the very basic way of doing it. And it really depends on building a financial model that includes all of the revenue you expect and all of the cost you expect.
Right, right, perfect. We have another question from Bassem. What is the best incubator based in Egypt? There's a little bit off the pitching topic, and probably it has to do with personal opinion. But if you can mention some of the best ones, for example.
Sure, I don't want to sound too biased. I can mention the ones that I regularly work with so that I don't get into too much trouble.
Yeah.
But there are a bunch of it. And basically, look, it depends on what your startup is, right? So Flat 6 Labs is a big incubator, a very big accelerator in the region, not just in Egypt. And they go for tech startups, right? So if you're not a tech startup, then don't apply to the Flat 6 Labs. Mint Incubator, which is something that I work on, is, for example, sector agnostic. It will invest in anything. Mm-hmm. But Mint Incubator is owned by EG Bank. So maybe if you're a fintech startup, you think about that. Mm-hmm. And then there is Falak. Falak is more of a governmental entity. So they invest as well as in clean tech, fintech, and just sector or general track. So if you are looking maybe to leverage that, you can apply there. There's ACV Lab, there's Injaz. Injaz is very focused on ideation, early stage startups. So if you're there, you want to go there. If you're still an idea, you want to apply there. And that's basically how to do it, right? There's no such thing as the best accelerator, the best incubator. There's the best incubator accelerator for you. And you'll find that anywhere you go, especially when it comes to investors. You'll find investors that are good for you and investors that aren't. And that's really the culture, I think, in the US and in global markets more than here, which is that when you see a good startup, you know they're going to reject investors because they think, hey, I can do better, right? And that's when you see the investors globally kind of sweating to get a chance to invest in this startup. So it's all about you choosing what's best for you rather than what's the best in general.
Right, perfect. Ahmad Youssef is also asking, what is the perfect number of slides? And what is the most important one? That question keeps recurring, right? What is the most important slide?
It's so difficult because it's very different, right? So like I said, let's just go through a few examples if you don't mind. If there's a startup that does deep learning AI, the most important slide will be the problem and solution. because without that, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? If you're doing a marketplace, most important slide is your business model or your market size or your perhaps even traction. So it really depends on what you're doing and then what that kind of pain point that you're going to want to explain from the start so that you can get people in. For example, you have one startup that's doing construction, and one of their biggest questions was how durable is your product? And so they included that, and that was the most important slide because that was the slide where people started looking up because it was durable and it ended their speculation. So it really depends on you. And I know this is a very general answer that might not be actionable, but you need to think about what kind of questions am I expecting to be asked, where that bulk of questions is, and then that's the slide you want to focus on.
Right. Perfect. Thank you so much, Ahmed. If I may, I have one more question, which is a doubt that I've been having. Should you include your exit strategy? Because there's contrasting opinions and advice regarding this. Should you include that?
I mean, right. So for me, I haven't seen it so far when it comes to the stage that I'm in. I think in countries like Bahrain, for example, with VCs like Tenmu, they're always looking at exit strategies. And so it's a big part of their presentation is to include an exit strategy within your pitch deck. Here, like I said, I really haven't seen it. I've seen most of the time this question being asked in future kind of meetings. So when you pitch in front of someone, they're probably going to ask you to meet, especially if it's in a demo day or an informal method or atmosphere. And so you need to have that answer ready so that when you're asked, you're able to kind of give a clear strategy. But including it in the pitch deck, I think might not be the best place.
Right. Perfect. So thank you so much for all these incredible insights. It has been such a rich session. We're going to put all of this into an article, into practical advice. The video is going to be also available on YouTube. Watch, ask your questions. Thank you, Ahmed. Again, I can't thank you enough. And Cairo Angels for this partnership that we're having for Ramadan. So have a lovely evening. And stay safe, stay home in quarantine. Let's make the most of this time. And Ramadan Kareem again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.